Hi! Today I want to show you how you can create a fully dynamic drag and drop Kanban element just like this in Wized and Webflow that will actually, if you take a look in here, update the data in this JSON object based on the way how I'm going to drag and drop this data around, which makes it super easy to then take this new data if something updates, if something changes, and to send that back to Xano or to any other backend and even MemberStack if you want, super easily without much code needed. Actually, we're not going to use any code for this drag and drop functionality, just like this, because we're going to use Webflow's native on-event actions, which now finally support all HTML actions, which they always did in Embed 2, but we just didn't know that this feature existed. And now I just looked into the dashboard. They updated the UI, and I'm so grateful that Whiz did it. They updated the UI to now say frequently used values to make it clear that I can add any custom value in here. So thank you so much to the Whiz design team for doing this, that it's now easier to add more customized functionality into your on-event actions. But let's get right into the Webflow setup and let's get started with building Kanbans. So we have the Kanban holder in here as a custom Webflow element, which really is the Kanban module. It is the Kanban itself. It is what is holding all these items in here that we're going to move around and we're going to calculate with it. So we just have this to a position of relative, as you can see right here, and we're going to do overflow hidden. Now, why overflow hidden? And this will be important later on because we're going to use overflow hidden to get rid of this ugly scrolling bar that would normally occur if I'm going to add all items in here and I would scroll a bit. That's a bad example, but I would be able then to scroll a bit, and we don't have a scrolling bar in here, so we're going to use overflow to get rid of that scrolling bar. And if we now go one layer deeper, we will see we have the Kanban label holder, which is just a div block that has a position of absolute, and it's targeted on the top header. And we just have in here nested a grid that will then just contain like some div blocks for styling, so that we have like a visual indication for what this bucket is, that this is the haven't started, that this is the working on it, and that this is the completed bucket. And yeah, that's the magic that is going on in here. And then we have the Kanban scroll. So we're going to basically do -2 to the side. This is how we're going to get this thing a bit out of line. And then we're going to do +2 rem to the other side as the padding to have the same formatting as normally, but to basically use this to create an overlap in here for the position where the scroll bar would be normally in, to then go to the Kanban holder and say, you know what, we're going to cut everything off that is farther than this edge right here, using the overflow hidden to get rid of the scrolling bar, which just really doesn't look that great. You could also use custom code to get rid of that, but I think this is the easiest and most practical version of doing it though. And yeah, let's get into the grid that is in the scroll, the Kanban scroll, which basically just holds this buckets in here, this items buckets. And what we're going to do with those buckets in here is every bucket will have a separate Wized attribute. As you can see, this for haven't started yet has the Wized attribute of Wized uncompleted tasks holder. And the other one for working on it has the Wized attribute of pending tasks holder. And the completed one will have the Wized attribute for completed tasks holder. And what we're going to do in Wized is basically think of it like this. When I'm going to drop an item in the, for example, pending tasks holder, we will have in the drop event on the pending tasks holder the function to push now this object which I dragged over it into the hidden input field related to the pending tasks holder to then re-render this list to show this new item that was dropped in here as a new item that is now part of this new list that was pushed into it. So we're going to basically not drag and drop just for visual purposes. We're dragging the item, dropping it, and while we drop it, we're transferring data that was saved in a variable to then release it using the attribute we have on this field, and then to run a function. Oh, if this was now dropped on the pending task holder, we're going to add it to the .push to the hidden input field. We're going to push this object which we tracked on drag, and that will be then released, pushed into this holder that is related to tasks. And we have a second hidden input field for completed tasks holder, so that when we drag it in here, it goes in here. And when we drag it in here, it goes in here. And if we drag it in here, excuse me, it goes in here. So that when I drag it in here, it just doesn't go in here. That wouldn't be good. So this is how we're going to have, or why we're going to have a different attribute for all of those. And then we just have actually the hidden input field. Let's look into that. So we have a hidden input attribute of true applied to it. So it will hide that element using some CSS magic I'll be going on later in there. And then we have, for example, for this one, a Wized attribute of uncompleted tasks, because it is in the uncompleted tasks holder, as you can see in here. And then for the pending tasks holder, we have a hidden input field for pending tasks. And for the completed tasks holder, we have a hidden input field for completed tasks. So you get the idea. We're going to link that. And for those, we're going to use the hidden input field because that's a super handy way to work with that. And now we have the cards. So those are the things that we're going to drag and drop around. So we're just going to add this as a custom element in Webflow, and we're going to do draggable equals true. And then we're just going to give this one, because it is in the to-do tasks folder, it is in the uncompleted tasks folder, we're going to give this a Wized attribute of uncompleted task item. So you get the concept, because it is in the uncompleted tasks folder, we're going to name this uncompleted task item so that we can link back where it is in and where it belongs. And we're going to add Wized cloak true on top of that because we want to avoid content flashing. By the way, if you add Wized cloak normally on a div block, that will be fine. But if you add any attribute on a custom element, I found that sometimes in Webflow, you need to add a value for the first attribute value to be recognized. So if I were to add Wized cloak on this as a custom element, sometimes, in some instances, it may not apply the Wized cloak rule because it recognizes an empty value and therefore it doesn't work. I don't know if that's a bug on Webflow, if that's something that is normal for HTML. So this is why when I use custom components, I'm adding a true in here just to make sure that I don't have any issues in displaying those or applying the Wized cloak rule on custom elements, depending on how much I hack around with those. For example, making them draggable. And then we're going to go to the next card element. We're going to do again draggable true, and we're going to add Wized pending task item because it is belonging to the pending tasks holder and it is belonging to the pending tasks hidden input. So this is the whole concept. And we're going to do the same thing for completed tasks, draggable true, and we're going to do Wized completed task item. And that's like the whole principle for those so that we know where they belong. And that's basically the whole setup. And then we just have like a little div block just to have it fade out as we scroll to make it look nicer. But that's the whole setup in the Webflow canvas. And now let's just look in here. We have like the same thing we're going to do for Wized cloak. We just have that same thing for hidden inputs. We're just going to do hidden input to then hide the input. And there is no other code needed. This is fully built in Wized, no external library needed. And yeah, let's just make sure that we save everything. And then let's just move to our Whiz project. So here we are. Let's just refresh the canvas. By the way, I'm not really a big fan of this drop down here because I think when I just click on here to refresh attributes as I normally did, it is way simpler and easier, and it streamlines the process of working a bit faster or more efficiently in Wized than just toggling a dropdown. But I can totally understand that to maximize space. Who knows what other features will be coming in here? So there may be something better. But let's just go to the actions, or actually let's start with just guiding you through how this whole works in theory. When I'm dragging PM Josh, for example, I will create, or I will update this v.dragged item variable and transfer the data related to this element for PM Josh and add this object related to this rendered list item in the variable for v.dragged item. And the moment I'm going to hover now v.dragged item over working on it, I will be now releasing the data I have in this hidden input based on the attribute I have on here into the hidden input field right in here, for example. And I will be then after that clearing this variable out. So think of it like this. I'm releasing this over the ones where it actually recognizes it, because those are drop zones. When I will release this, which transfers the data over here into the pending, it will push it into the hidden input field for pending tasks. And let's release. We can see we got that cleared out. And we have in the pending tasks array right here, pushed at the last item, pushed to the end, the task for PM Josh, which was, this whole object was pushed in here, and then we just have the breakthrough of dot tasks. You can add as many subpaths, so as many items in this object as you want, and then you can just define what you want to specify. And the moment I release it and the hidden input field was updated, it is re-rendering the list. It is snapping back the animation, because we prevent default in that, and it's then re-rendering the list all in on the millisecond to make it look like you actually dragged the item in there. But as everything on the web, it is not as it seems. We're actually not going to, because drag and drop means I would take this element and merge it in here, which is not what we're doing. I'm taking this element, for example, I'm recognizing the object that is related to it using the Wized state variable. I'll be releasing it over this. I will be in a millisecond copying the data, taking the data from this variable and pushing it into this hidden input field related to this drop zone, and then in another millisecond recalculating the list and removing it from here and making it look like it was dragged in here, even though I'm not moving the element. I'm only, as you can see in X-ray mode, there is no other foreign element. So, for example, this element is not in here. It is always related to this one. So the example gets a bit clearer. If I reload this page and I were to move something in here, we still have those main elements from which we're rendering the list in here. We're not going to move them around as it is usual for drag and drop. For example, at the sortable JS, which is a common issue with that. We're actually just going to take this, mark this down, and copy it in the variable, and then paste the value that we have stored in the variable as we drag this around when we release it, and push it into this hidden item to then render the list. And this all happens due to the reactivity of Wized in a snap. So this is how this is working. And let's get through the technical setup here. So we just first of all need to render the lists. And we just have and this can come from your database. In this example, we're just going to use dummy data for this. So since the render list action will be based on the hidden input field, we only need to set the initial value for the hidden input fields, which is i.uncompleted tasks for the uncompleted tasks, and i.pending tasks for the pending tasks, and i.completed tasks for the completed tasks. If you go to Webflow, you will see that those are these hidden inputs I have in here. I have, for example, uncompleted tasks. This Wized uncompleted tasks will be this one, and I will set the value in here, and the i.pending tasks will be this one, and Wized pending tasks, and I will set the input for that in here in the third line. And for the i.completed tasks, as you can see, I have that hidden input field in here for Wized completed tasks, and I will just simply set that value in here. And then based on the value that we have in those hidden input fields right in here, we're going to render this item as a list for this field, this item as a list for this field, and this item as a list for this field. And if we now go, let's take the first render list action in here, you will see that I will apply this render list action to the render list item. It's always the first one in here. Now we're going to go this for the uncompleted tasks. So for this one, we will have this function here to render the list from i.uncompleted tasks, which is our hidden input field for the uncompleted tasks. And then we're just going to apply the v.iterator in there to have Wized help us index and identify everything dynamically. That will be super helpful for dragging and dropping, which will now come on event. So we have an on event action basically that will on event drag start. And by the way, keep in mind, you can add any custom event in here. It doesn't need to be from this list. So on event drag start, we're going to run the function to have our variable, which we just defined as an empty variable, v.draggedItem equal the item that we dragged. And just like on click, if you were to do something on click, you know that if I click on the second item, I will get the second item in the variable. If I click on the third item, I will get the third item in the variable. If I click on the first item, I will get the first item in the variable. The same thing applies to drag start. I just dropped it. But if I'm going to start dragging the third item, as you can see in here, I will have the third item in this variable, like on click. And if I'm going to drag the second item, I will have the second item in the variable, and this goes all the way to 1,000,000. So this is super handy, and it doesn't just only work for click. So the moment I'll be dragging on drag event, I will set this variable. As you can see in here, I drag it. It is then setting this, recognizing this event and setting this as a variable. And the moment I release it, it is clearing the variable. So this is what we have in this function here. When on event drag end, which is another custom event that is not in this list, but you can just simply add that in here. On event drag end, we're going to run the function to just have this variable that is tracking which item is dragged equal as an empty string. That's it. And then we're just going to target the text field in here, as you can see. We're going to target the text field as an element action, uncompleted task name, set text. We're going to do i.uncompleted tasks from our hidden input field, and we're going to use .tasks, and we make sure to use v.iterator to always get the dynamic value. So we have PM Josh, call annoy, email Joe. That's always a dynamic item. That is it. And we apply the same principle for working on it and complete it. So I have the same setup for when I go on completed task item. I render the list from i.completed task. It needs to be rendered from the hidden input field related to this bucket. And then I do the v-iterator, and then I have again on drag start, I have v.draggedItem equal the dynamic item for i.completed tasks, which is the hidden input field as well. And then on event drag end, I'll just have this equal as an empty string. And again, we have the same thing for pending. It's not really greatly organized because we cannot really sort filters and filters. So for pending, we have the same thing. And we're also going to render the name. So for pending, we're going to render the list from i.pending tasks, just like this. And we're going to apply the v.iterator on event drag start. We're going to take this dynamic item, i.pending tasks, like on click. we're going to do v.iterator, and we have this be the value of v.dragged item in here. As you can see, that works. If I'm going to drag the item from this bucket, it will equal PM Josh. If I'm going to drag this item from this bucket, it will equal email Alex. If I'm going to drag this item from this bucket, it will say make an app. So this is just how we're going to do that for all those buckets and for all those items. And now we want to actually push them somewhere in. And we have now the second part of the Kanban are the buckets. So when we drag something, we get the data in this variable right here. And now, since we got the data on drag event in here, it is super easy now for us to use Wized to detect over which of those items this is hovering over, and on drop, then push this object that is right in here, push this object into the associated hidden input field that we have one for each bucket on release, and then to update this list. So the way we're going to do that is, let's start with the first one. We have an on-event action, we have an element action on this uncompleted tasks holder, which is, if we go in Webflow, the holder right in here, where we have the attributes applied to it, that will be then used as the drop zone, that will be then linked to the hidden input field, because they share the same naming convention for uncompleted, pending, and completed. And we're going to basically, on event, drag over, do a function of prevent default. We need to do this, otherwise the drag and drop will be funky. So if I, for example, wouldn't prevent default, and I wouldn't just have this secret function in here to prevent default as well, the drag and drop will behave, in this case actually, it will behave funky. So as you can see, it will, in this case, not really work. So we need to add on event drag over prevent default, and we need to also run a function for e.prevent default to then just really target the prevent default also on this element action as well. For some reason, it doesn't work if I only use prevent default in here, so just add e.prevent default as a function in here as well to make sure that you don't have any funky drag and drop behavior in Wized. And then on event drop, we're going to prevent default as well. Of course, we're always going to do prevent default for drag and drop, and we're going to run a function. And what this function is doing, it is basically const. We're going to set the const for current item as the current item that is in the v.dragged item. So when I'm going to grab this, we will have that in here. We're going to save this as a const. And in this function in here, I'm just simply going to check now. Basically what this whole thing is doing is I'm checking if the array I try to drag this in, already has the item in here. Because if I wouldn't have, for example, this function, and I would just add this in here, and let's just remove this, like this, I could duplicate items. So let's test this out. If I were to drag the item, I think I did it for this one. If I were to drag the item in myself, I would clone the item, which is not what we want, at least not in this application. So we want to have this condition in here that will look out for, does this item I try to drag, this item, for example, PM Josh, does this already exist in this bucket? And if it is, it should actually prevent the default. I think I have to update something in here. Let's look into that. Okay. Oh, I did it on here. I got to update this on here. Perfect. I got to put this right in here. And then it will not work because it is looking, does this already exist in here? Yes. So it will not push it in here. But if it already or if it doesn't already exist in this bucket, it will push it in here. But if it already does, it will not push it in here. So we're going to put the dot push for the current item that was defined up here using the variable. We're going to define this dot push condition. We're only going to do this dot push if the item we try to push in the event or in the bucket that we're hovering over isn't already in it, because we don't want any double items. We don't want any item cloning to happen during this drag and drop event. And now you ask yourself, why are we going to clone this up here? Why are we taking the value in here and having this equal current item from the beginning? Because we have an action that we actually clear this variable out. Because this variable basically is helping us to identify which data is currently being dragged. But the moment we release it, we're going to lose that data. So the first thing before we're going to do anything with the data, we want to save it. And the way we can save this data before another event happens is doing const current item, and we're going to have this equal immediately before we start anything on drop, before we have any time that we can lose anything after it was released, because the drop event happens before the release event, because it can only be released after it was dropped. So the first thing we're going to do in here is getting the current value that was dropped in here and just basically keeping that in the memory, keeping that in mind, and calling this little backup current item. So then, even when we lose the data in this variable, we still have this data in the current item, which we defined in the const in here. That's why we can then use this current item to do this function and to see if this already exists in the bucket or not, and then even take this data that we copied right in here basically and push this object into where it will belong. And we have i.uncompletedtasks.push, because if I drag something over in here, over to uncompleted tasks, I want this to go into the hidden input field for uncompleted tasks so that it will then re-render the list and show this item in my uncompleted tasks. And then I have another function to define an exception template for removing the object from an array. So we're going to basically, execution template, excuse me. So we're going to define somewhat like a function, just a bit simpler in here, that we're then going to look basically when I'm going to take this object in here and I'm pushing it in here. We would normally, if we wouldn't have this, let's just comment this out real quick. If I were to comment this out in here, if I were to drop this in here, let's try this again. If I were to drop this in here, it would basically not really work. So if I were to try to drop this in here, since we cannot get rid of this in here, it would just not work. So what I need to do is I need to basically remove this item from the other task where it is in. So when I have this in this working on it, I need to remove it from here to then push it in here. Just to make sure that there are no drag and drop issues, right? That we are actually transferring the data instead of copying it over into the different field, because we want to move the data like this. And this is what we're doing here. So in this lower part here, we're basically defining a function that basically is taking the array and it's filtering the item out using JSON stringify item, and we're just going to filter this out. So in this example, we're going to have pending task equal i.pending tasks minus the current item. And we're going to have completed tasks equal i.completed tasks minus the current item. And when I drag, for example, this item in here, we're still going to do this function for this one, even though it wasn't in here, just to make sure that in case something got cloned over or there was an issue with the node, that we're going to remove that. Because it would be more work for us to figure out where we're dragging it from then just to run this function for another item, just to make sure that it was removed. So, and then we're just basically repeating this whole principle on all of those. Just one thing to consider is, for the other ones, you have to always revert that function, meaning that when I have this bucket and I'm going to drag this in here, if the drag event happens on here, I would look for this and for this item to be cleared out. But if I were to drag it from here into here, I would want to, no, that's the same thing. If I were to drag this one in here, I would clear this and this one out. And basically, if I were to drag this one in here, I would clear this and this one out. And it just repeats. So it just repeats all over the place. Drag and drop is complicated. I'm already fogged out in my head about this. But we're basically just needing to make sure that when something happens on here, we clear it out here and here. When something happens on here, we're clearing it here and here out. And when something happens on here, like this, we're clearing this and this out. So how this would work is, if we have the pending tasks holder and be pushed a new item in there, we want to remove this from uncompleted tasks and completed tasks. And if we add a new item into the completed tasks holder, we want to have the old item removed from uncompleted tasks and pending tasks, always to two ones that it is not currently dragged on, because we don't want to clone any elements in here. And that is basically how we're going to do drag and drop in Wized. And even though that is no code, it doesn't mean that it's the most easiest thing to do. It still confuses me a bit, to be quite honest, because drag and drop is not native to your browser. Your browser doesn't know that drag and drop exists. It looks like drag and drop, but we're actually just transferring data and then pushing a new object into a new list and making it look like it was dragged and dropped and providing this user experience for drag and drop. If you have any questions about this, and I'm going to put a full clonable for Wized and the Webflow side of this in the video description, that you can just easily clone and copy and update and just target and tailor it to whatever you're trying to do with it. Again, it is a complex stuff. Drag and drop is not easy. It's not easy in code and it's not easy in low code, but it is way easier in low code than it is in code. So I hope that this really helps you build your drag and drop application in Wized. And if you have any questions, which you may have a lot, please feel free to put them down in the comments and I will do my best to answer them to the best of my ability and to help you get your drag and drop functionality implemented into Wized. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for all your support. I really, really, really appreciate that. I hope that I didn't fried your brain too hard with this video, because I feel like my brain was in a deep fryer for now 33 minutes. But it's an exciting topic, but it may be a bit of a daunting one. But it surely is something for people who want to get the most out of Wized, because not everybody is developing such applications in Wized. And now you got a template, so you don't have to fry your brain too hard to get this done. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.